It had been a while since my last relationship, and I felt ready to start looking for something new. I downloaded Bumble. I knew some of my friends weren't into it because they didn't like that the woman had to message first. However, I didn't mind this aspect, and I actually liked that I didn't have to be the one to think up an opening line. I matched with a woman named Stacy. She was attractive, and after checking out her profile, I found out we were both outdoorsy, being from the Pacific Northwest. I was kind of hoping she would message me, but the power was in her hands. I was aware of the 24-hour countdown, but knew that what would be, would be. I was pretty happy the next day when I woke up and saw I had a message from Stacy. It just said, "Hey, someone who enjoys hiking too. What's your favorite trail?" She sent this message at 3:00 a.m., but I didn't think anything of it. I just figured she worked nights or was a night owl. I replied to her, and we started talking, mostly about our favorite hiking trails and other interests. She seemed cool, and at this point, I wasn't detecting any red flags. After a couple of days of messaging back and forth, I asked her if she wanted to meet up that weekend and go hiking in the woods. She didn't message that day, and I thought I'd been ghosted. However, the next morning when I woke up, I saw that she messaged me at 3:00 a.m., saying she'd love to go hiking with me. She told me a time and said to meet in the west side parking lot. I knew the area well. There was a clearing there, and it tended to be quieter than the other parts of the woods. It had been a while since I'd been on a date, and I was nervous. So, I got there early, parked, and went for a short walk to try and calm my nerves. The only people I passed were a dog walker and a couple of hikers. My walk helped, and as I made my way back toward the parking lot, I was feeling more excited than nervous. I peered through the trees and saw there was only one other vehicle in the parking lot, a silver Jeep. I figured this must be Stacy's. I was going to walk over there and knock on her window, but before I stepped out of the trees, I saw the door open and someone step out. However, it definitely wasn't Stacy. It was a man in a dark blue raincoat, and he had his hood up, making it hard to see his face clearly. He walked over to my car, pressed his hand to the glass, and started peering through my driver's side window. I stood there watching from the trees, not quite believing what I was seeing. I didn't know who this weird man was or why he was snooping into my car. I was about to go over to him and ask, but before I did, I noticed him pull away from my window and take his phone out of his pocket. My phone let out a loud beep, and I cursed under my breath as I saw the man look my way. Our eyes met, and there was something about his unfriendly look that just made me feel uneasy. He put his phone to his ear, and my phone started ringing. I pulled it out of my pocket, already knowing who would be calling. It was Stacy. When I looked away from my phone, I saw the man pull something from his pocket, a knife. Then, he gave me this sinister smile before he crouched down by my tires and started slashing them one by one. There was no way I was going to confront some crazy guy with a knife, so I ran off into the woods. I heard footsteps behind me and hid behind a bush. I could see someone walking past with something gripped in his hand. It was that guy in the raincoat, holding the knife and thrashing it around as he walked. I placed my hands over my mouth and tried to hold my breath. I was terrified he would find me. When he finally walked off, I let out a sigh as quietly as I could, and I felt a small sense of relief. I was still too freaked out to move, so I checked my phone, but there was no reception. This didn't surprise me, as it was usually difficult to get reception this far in the woods. I don't know how long I was there for. It was all a blur. But when I heard more footsteps, I started shaking, thinking that the guy in the raincoat was back. I peered out and saw it was the hikers I'd seen earlier. I went over to them and explained what had happened. I walked with them back to their car, which was in a different parking lot, and they drove me back to town. I called the police, and they went out to my car to check the area. They said there was no sign of the man in the raincoat or his Jeep. He was long gone. I didn't think to get his license plate number. I wish I had. The whole thing freaked me out, but I was so shocked that night I didn't think to check Bumble or try to speak to Stacy. Then the next morning, I woke up and saw that I'd received a message from her sent at 3:00 a.m. I felt sick to my core when I read what it said. It would have been more fun if you'd let me catch you. I deleted the app and also blocked Stacy's number. I don't know why that man set up a fake profile and lured me into the woods. All I do know is that if I'd waited in the car or not managed to outrun him, then that knife he was holding would have probably been used on me, and I would have never made it back from that hiking trip in one piece. I had been single for a while, so my friend, who was tired of hearing me complain about it, signed me up on a dating app without my knowledge. The first I knew of it was when she showed up with a mischievous grin and waved her phone in my face. The guy she'd matched me with was named Paul. At first, I was annoyed that she'd been talking to him while pretending to be me, but in the end, I did cave and agree to meet him. He did look good in his picture, and we both loved animals, so at least we had something in common. My friend set up a bar date for us and assured me I'd be stupid not to go, as he seemed like a catch. Seeing as this was all my friend's idea, I made her drive me to the bar and wait for me in the parking lot. I figured this way I could drink to calm my nerves and also make a quick exit if he turned out to be a psycho. I sat at a table in the corner and kept a firm gaze on the entrance. I was really nervous about this, and the longer the time passed without him showing up, the more anxious I got. I texted my friend for reassurance, and she told me that he was probably just running late, but she texted him to ask where he was. As the time turned from passably late to just rude, it was clear to me that I'd been stood up. I texted my friend saying he wasn't coming, so she should come join me for a drink. When a few minutes passed and she hadn't replied, I called her. This unfamiliar muffled voice said hello. It wasn't my friend. It was a man's voice. I felt my heart frantically beating as I asked him where my friend was. I heard more muffled sounds, as if he was trying to talk with his mouth closed or something like that. Then, in this placid voice, he told me my friend was enjoying her date. With alarm bells ringing in my head, I ran out of the bar and into the parking lot. My friend's car was gone, but near the spot it had been was a phone. I recognized the purple casing. It was my friend's phone. I picked it up and saw that open on the cracked screen was a message thread. It was the chat between Paul and my friend, pretending to be me. Her last message had asked him where he was, and he replied, "I'm closer than you think." I suddenly knew what happened. This Paul found out that my friend had been messaging him, not me, and he had taken her. I called the cops and told them what happened. They told me to stay in the bar and they'd be there soon. Just sitting there, knowing my friend was in trouble and feeling helpless, was horrible. I couldn't stop sobbing and shaking, imagining the worst. When the police showed up, they took my friend's phone and asked me some questions about the dating app and Paul. They told me they'd do everything they could to try and find her. They took me to the police station, and I just sat there and waited. It was agonizing. My mind went into overdrive about all the terrible things that Creep could be doing to my friend. The officer came up to me and told me that she'd been found. That Creep had kidnapped her and taken her to some house on the outskirts of town. She wasn't physically hurt, but I knew the emotional trauma would stay with her for a long time. I was so relieved she was okay, but I also felt so guilty that I made her take me to the bar and wait in the parking lot. I can't help but feel that she went through hell, and it was my fault. I met up with her after that. Things were awkward between us. She refused to talk about what happened. She said she didn't blame me, but I know she was lying. I could see the blame in her eyes. The guy was convicted of kidnapping and sent to prison for several years. Knowing that one day he'll get out makes me feel so anxious. Not for myself and my friend, but for anyone else unfortunate enough to meet him. All of my friends were in relationships, which meant they were always too busy with their partners to bother with me. I was beginning to feel lonely and a little fed up, so I downloaded Tinder. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I just wanted someone to talk to and potentially hook up with. I had been on the app for a day or two when I matched with Matt. He was attractive, easy to talk to, and lived nearby. I made it clear that I wasn't after anything serious, and he replied, telling me that he was fine with that. He then went on to say he had a house to himself the next night and asked if I wanted to come over. I'd never go to a stranger's house without meeting them somewhere public first, so I texted him back, saying I'd consider it, but wanted to meet downtown beforehand. He seemed cool with this, and we agreed to meet up in a coffee shop the next morning. For the rest of the evening, we continued texting. It got pretty flirty, and at this point, I honestly thought this guy was the real deal. The next day, I showed up at the coffee shop and waited for him. I started to feel nervous, and every time the door opened and a guy walked in, my heart stopped. The longer I waited without him showing up, the more on edge I became. I eventually checked my messages to see if he'd contacted me to say he was running late. He hadn't. As I started typing a message to ask him where he was, I noticed he was typing. Then, a message from him popped up saying, "You look good. Red's a good color on you." I gasped on reading this, as I was wearing a red sweater. This meant that Matt, or whoever he was watching me. My gaze darted from person to person, trying to figure out who it was that sent me that message. I replied, "Where are you?" Instantly, he replied, "Looking at you. I can't wait until later." I couldn't see any of the other customers typing, but I knew Matt was watching close by. I wasn't going to stay there any longer, so I left the coffee shop and hurried toward my car. I kept looking around me, terrified that the guy was going to jump out at me at any moment. I was so relieved when I got into my car and drove home. Matt hadn't sent me any more texts, but I didn't want to hear from him again, so I deleted the app. It had freaked me out, but I was relieved I'd arranged to meet him in a coffee shop first instead of going to his house. That evening, my roommates were out with their partners, so I was in the house alone. I was on my laptop in the living room when I heard the doorbell ring. I was still creeped out from earlier, so I didn't want to open the door when I wasn't expecting any visitors. I decided to ignore the doorbell and just let whoever it was get the hint and leave. Suddenly, my phone beeped. It was from an unknown number, and I got chills as I read it. "Hey, I'm outside. Let me in." I hadn't arranged to meet anyone tonight apart from Matt. I was still holding my phone when it beeped again. "It's rude to keep a guy waiting. Open up." The doorbell rang again, and as it did, I felt my heart pound. I didn't know what to do. There was no way for me to see the porch from inside without opening the front door. I thought about trying to leave out the back, but just the thought of leaving when there was some creep out there terrified me. Then I received another text. "Chicks like you ruin everything." Then there was this loud, constant thumping on the door. It was so forceful, I thought he was going to break the door down. I was in a complete panic as I rushed into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. The thumping stopped, but I stood at the end of the hallway holding a knife with a shaking hand and staring at the door. He didn't knock on the door again, and he didn't send me any more messages. Exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep in the hallway still holding the knife. The next morning, when my roommate entered with her boyfriend, they were shocked to find me in that very position. I explained what had happened, and they told me to call the police. I didn't do this as I didn't want my family to find out I was texting a guy for a hookup. After that, my paranoia got really bad. No matter what I did or where I went, I became convinced he was watching me. It got to the point where I wouldn't go out unless I was with someone else, and if I was in the house alone, I'd make sure I had a knife next to me. This was a while ago, and I'm dealing with it better now. Moving out of that house helped, but sometimes even now, I still get this uneasy feeling that I'm being watched or that I'll get another unwanted text message from him.